right on to the next video because I really have to start making some content for you all because I'm doing a lot and not saying a lot, so none of this stuff matters if I don't tell people about it when it's relevant. So here we go. Scott Fishbowl. I've been making my Scott Fishbowl draft sheet, which is literally just ADP with putting it in the format of a 12-team league, so you don't just see ADP, you see which round that technically means in a draft, if that was a draft, as well as importing some basic stats from Amaze Hayes' stat history that he put out for the Scott Fishbowl, and I also calculated a stat I like to look at while drafting for the Scott Fishbowl specifically, just to give me an idea of who's adding what kind of advantage. I thought I'd just show you what that is and tell you where you can get it. So this is a current iteration of my draft sheet, or Google Sheet, or just a list of things that I want to know while I'm doing a Scott Fishbowl draft. And you can see that the ADP rank is running along the left, which the ADP rank is just the pick, the average at which players are picked within a draft is just that pick. I also have the teams listed because there's a third round reversal, and that can throw some people off. So say for example, like myself, I'm team 2 because I have the second round pick, so I can see who on average is being picked at each of my draft picks in a Scott Fishbowl draft. You can also see the ADP range. The ADP source is actually goingfor2.com. Definitely recommend checking them out and hitting those follow buttons of the people putting out the ADP for Scott Fishbowl. So you can also see the ADP range. Thanks for going to 2, so you know that, for example, Tua Tagovailoa is drafted on average between pick 19 and 42. You can get a good sense of who will be available to you at your next pick, so you can, as I like to do, try and plan out roughly how I'm building this team and which direction it might be good to go in. We also have this column here because sometimes it's just fun to be able to filter and see where the rookies are going. If you're going to go with an all-youth build, it's nice to be able to see that Bijan Robinson is expected to go somewhere in the 10th round between pick 10 and 24, and also it's just an easy column to create. I just want a quick reference of how many points players score in general. Points per game is the next strongest thing next to ADP. In terms of a rough guide, if you have no other ideas or just got Fishbowl scoring, Patrick Mahomes scored 37 points per game last year, 33 points per game the year before, and 37 points per game the year before that, making for an average of 36 points per game. It's pretty good. And just in case, because points per game is, but I put up how many games they played, just in case you want to check that it's not a small sample trap. All right. So yeah, you just see the average, the points per game and the average of the last 3 years. I just thought that was an easy thing that I want to reference while I'm on the clock. Again, if I'm trying to make decisions relatively quickly, not that you have to rush while you're on the clock. The next section along is actually a stat I made for the Scott Fishbowl based on my value over baseline calculations. Yeah, I'll get into this a little bit, but I don't want you to fixate on it. It's not a stat that's going to solve Dynasty, or I don't think it's particularly big edge in the Scott Fishbowl, but what I wanted to see is how much advantage a particular player has offered in a season and on average over the last 3, and relative to if your team just started baseline players at that position. So what I did is I multiplied the baseline points scored by players in the starter range. So you can start 2 quarterbacks in Scott Fishbowl. That's 24 players. So whatever the points per game of quarterback 25 was, twice, because you can start 2 of them. What's the difference between starting 2 baseline players at quarterback and starting Patrick Mahomes and a baseline player for an entire season? It's relative to how many games the players played, because I multiplied it by the number of games they played, and it's also relative to a 16-game season and baseline players at that position. So it's both team relative and starter position relative and positional relative, and I thought that was a nice encapsulation of just how much advantage a single player adds in the Scott Fishbowl using Scott Fishbowl scoring. So too long didn't read. On average, a team starting Travis Kelce over the last 3 years has had an 18 points per game advantage over a team starting just 2 baseline players. Now, obviously, you're not facing teams only starting 2 baseline players, but it gives you an idea that Travis Kelce versus positionally in the Scott Fishbowl provides actually the biggest edge to any one team. If he plays all 16 games this year versus a team that finds no Travis Kelce's or just starts 2 baseline borderline startable players in the Scott Fishbowl, you're getting an 18 point advantage on a week over week basis. So that's all the stat is. It sounds complicated, but that's how to read it. It's versus a team starting borderline startable players, what's your advantage over that baseline team? And Travis Kelce provides the most, but after that, it's quarterback, it's Pat. That's what they've done over the last 3 years. How do I want to move from here? How do I want to be on my team? And that's what, for me, a draft sheet's meant to do. Just give me a too long didn't read glance. I don't know. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't want to give this away. And people be like, oh, it's just ADP in an order, which it basically is. And so what I did is I calculated how we're drafting right now according to ADP. You can see the rate at which positions are getting taken overall in the draft. So you can see wide receivers pretty hot and try and find trends for yourself and how your draft is going different. So you might find some advantage that way. Also, just some basic stuff I like to understand about leagues in general, which is who's scoring the most points more often. So this is the overall top 24 players in Scott Fishbowl scoring over the last 5 or 6 years in 2017 to 2022. And you can see quarterback pretty much, it's a populous group inside the top 24. But you do occasionally get a Cooper Kupp right here, for example, just making a difference. And then, same vein, just the average percentage of players inside the top 5, the top 12, the top 24, 36, 96, and 132 overall. 132 players are started every week in an individual week. That's why I went to that number. And how many of them should have been quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends when you're making start-sit decisions. So you can see inside the top 132 overall, only 12% of kickers actually finish inside that positional rank. So that gives you an idea that they probably have a decent floor, but not a lot of upside on a week-by-week basis, generically. And that's about it. That's my draft sheet so far. I'm happy to add other stuff or try to add other things that you might want to reference, but I really wanted to keep it simple. I didn't want it to become a huge sheet that no one can understand, because I do that too often. If you're interested in it, hit me up on Twitter. Just let me know. It's probably the simplest, rather than me setting up a website for this or trying to add it to someone else's website. It's just a Google Sheet, or it's a free download link. I'll be happy to send it your way if you're engaged or part of the community of the Scott Fishbowl. I want to encourage the charity. Go check out scottfishbowl.com, by the way, to find out more about the Scott Fishbowl, or join for next year, or get engaged and find the links to the Twitter accounts and stuff like that. But I mostly just want to encourage people to engage in the community, to become part of the group chats, part of the conversation, because I want to meet you and talk about fantasy football in general. That's where a lot of us meet. That's where a lot of the community comes together. And the more it grows, the easier it is for us to actually be a community. And that's really my interest overall and broadly. So this is my attempt to encourage it. Let me know what you think. If you want the sheet, comment down below your Twitter if it's easier for you. I appreciate you. See you in the next video.